We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! Here is part 2 of What If Naruto Became a Jonin Sensei. He was left broken from the death of his parents. The one man who had salvaged the pieces burned to ashes in front of his eyes. At times, he questioned the meaning of life. But who knows? Maybe these 3 little genin might show him the answer. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 3, Jonin Sensei. The almost Team 7 found themselves seated on the academy rooftop. The genin were seated around a set of stairs, currently pondering the enigma that was Naruto Namikaze. He was tall, lanky, and had a lazy expression on his clothed face. He was currently seated on top of a railing, resting his face in his open palm, his lone eye regarding them with a disinterested gaze. He couldn't seriously be a jounen. Or that was what Konohamaru had kept muttering as they had climbed their way up the stairs to the rooftop after the jounen had instructed them to, disappearing in a flicker of movement. Coal eyes narrowed as dark blue regarded him. Sasuke knew better than to underestimate him. This guy was an S-rank shinobi. The Yellow Fang. Translation, one badass motherfucker. The aloof expression was probably an act. His sharp eyes took in broad shoulders, and large arms hidden under his black shirt showcasing powerful strength. When he had left them he moved so fast, that Sasuke imagined for a second that he wasn't there at all. And by the way his eye was sizing them up, he was no doubt devious and dangerous. From his tragic experience since that day when the traitor had slaughtered the entire clan, he had developed a sort of sixth sense to certain individuals. He knew the difference between a seasoned veteran and rookie chunin. He could tell from their chakra, and right now his senses were screaming danger. Even though the jounin was relaxed and looking like he would rather nap than be here, Sasuke could sense the tightly controlled power within him. Raw, powerful chakra was hidden under that aloof gaze. He wondered how many of his adversaries had underestimated him only to be killed before they could blink. His gaze locked on to the slanted headband covering his left eye. A Sharingan eye rested in his socket. The birthright of his clan. Yes. Naruto Namikaze was dangerous indeed. Sakura Haruno couldn't believe how much of a jerk this jounin was. First he had showed up 3 hours late, waltzing into the classroom without a care in the world, highlighting punctuality wasn't his forte. Then he made fun of her forehead. She had instantly disliked him. And then he had the audacity to tell them to meet him on the roof and had then left as quickly as he had came. She decided that the so-called Yellow Fang was nothing but overrated. Humph. Who the hell did he think he is, making fun of my forehead? Shaw, though the rumors of his good looks were kind of true. It was hard to tell from his mask, but his face seemed handsome. And his eye, she had never seen such a deep color of blue. She frowned at his headband covering the left side of his face. Did he lose his eye? Oh well, all she really cared about was that Sasuke-kun didn't think her forehead was too big. Meanwhile Konohamaru couldn't believe this guy. He had not even cast him a glance during their brief acquaintance. He dismissed him immediately like he was just another one of these losers. Did he not know he was? He was Konohamaru Sarutobi, honorable godson of the 3rd Hokage and Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. He was a hero. Kore. Everywhere he went people treated him with respect. His chest would puff with pride knowing that the entire village adored him. He was loved by the civilians for becoming a jailer to the terrible beast. The ninja population of the village gave him nods of respect knowing the weight of his sacrifice. And this blonde-haired pretty boy didn't even show him any gratitude. His brown eyes bored into the one lone eye that stared back with a dull gaze. Naruto had flickered up to the roof awaiting what would hopefully be his next team. He had routinely in the past told teams to meet him up on the roof and would quietly observe them, taken in their body language and attitudes. He was never impressed. It seemed the next generation would always have less talent and mannerisms than the previous one. Genin would graduate from the academy feeling that they were the next elite jounin or top kunoichi. PFF. Those were the ones that were sent back to the academy the next day. The so-called geniuses of the class were likely to pass, but so arrogant and prideful that they became the first causalities. This generation honestly had it good. They got to experience a childhood, having no idea of the horrors of war like his had experienced. Kids these days. Naruto lightly shook his head. He had yet to meet a team that was worthy of his standards. Eyeing the 3 kids in front of him, he reasoned that they would be another failure, starting with the first one to arrive. The only sibling that Itachi ever had, Sasuke Uchiha. The class genius. By his critical observation of him and the way his eyes narrowed, he deduced his reputation preceded him. Maybe he had inherited some genius from his brother. Next up was the Jinchuriki. Naruto could smell the arrogance emitting from the boy. His body language portrayed him as thinking he was the top dog. Someone that lavished in attention, and judging by his glare, he had expected him to be one of those fools that worshipped the ground he walked on. He didn't have any hate against him from the beast residing in him. But he honestly didn't like the way he acted. His father and mother had died sealing that beast inside of him, and the kid acted like he was a hero. Well, he would just have to show him that he was the villain. Next up was the last person to arrive. From the way her breath had been panting from walking up those set of stairs, he deduced she was the type that was more interested in boys than in her shinobi skills. He sniffed, picking up the scent of her cherry perfume, and had to wrinkle his nose. She was shyly glancing at Sasuke, trying to get his attention, but the Uchiha hadn't even spared her a glance. Girls these days. Clearing his throat, he caught the attention of the Genin. Well, one of them, as Sakura was the only one not paying him attention. He scratched his chin as he thought of an introduction. Yo! I'm Naruto Namikaze. As you may know, I'm the Jonin Sensei of Team 7. Now introduce yourselves. He gestured at the black-haired boy. Sasuke interlocked his hands between his face before he spoke. I'm Sasuke Uchiha. The boy had apparently finished staring defiantly back at him. Rubbing his chin, he thought he should have been more thorough in introductions. What are your likes and dislikes, your goals, if you will be so kind to share? His eyes narrowed before he spoke. I like very few things and dislike a lot of things. What I have is an ambition, not a goal. His eyes lost focus as if imagining his dream. I will kill a certain man and avenge my clan. That is my ambition. The 2 Genin beside him were silent in shock before a chuckle snapped their attention to the blonde jounen. His single eye was curled upward as if he was smiling before it fixed Sasuke with a pitiful look. What? The Avenger snarled at him. Nothing, nothing. Just thinking that the only way you would possibly be able to kill Itachi if he was blind and on the brink of death. Maybe then you would have a chance. He turned his gaze upward. Actually, you would most likely die before he did. Sasuke seethed in silent rage hearing the words from the jounen. Who the hell was the guy to tell him he couldn't beat Itachi? He was an Avenger. Itachi would die at his feet. Feeling his rage reach its limits, he exploded from the steps, aiming a fist at the blonde. But before he could even lift himself up off the stone steps, he found a blade pricking at edge of his jugular. Looking from the tip of the sword, his wide eyes trailed down to the handle held in the hand of a not-so-lazy-looking jounen. The lone eye was narrowed at him and he had lost his aloof manner. You seriously don't want to do that? His voice was calm, but the threatening tone was audible. Sasuke couldn't stop his legs from shaking. Such speed. His eyes widened even more at the cold steel pricking his throat. He had thought the jounen carried around a tanto judging by its shortness, but it wasn't so. The railing Naruto seated himself on was about 2 meters in front of them. No short sword could possibly reach that long. He blanched, realizing he hadn't moved. He just had drawn his sword. What kind of sword could extend like that? His fear was momentarily forgotten as he watched in fascination as the blade slowly receded from his neck, shortening till it held its previous appearance. The jounen smoothly sheathed his sword back into its hostler, eye still narrowed at the quivering genin in front of him. Don't try that shit again, tough guy. I have no qualms about sending you to the hospital. Capiche? His chakra spiked briefly, putting an enormous pressure down on Sasuke that caused him to fall back on the stone stairs, shaking like a leaf. He could only nod dumbly, feeling as if he just narrowly avoided death. And like a switch, Naruto was back to his lazy style as he regarded the other 2 genin with an eye smile. That goes the same for you too. The shaking genin nodded slowly, feeling that they had wholly underestimated the lazy jounen. He had moved so fast that they hadn't even seen what happened. 1 second Sasuke was about to charge him, and the next he was frozen from an extended sword pointed at his neck. And his chakra, he had only spiked it but had caused the stones around them to crack. They didn't allow that curved eye smile to fool them. Sakura nearly shrieked, finding his eye open and fixed on her. Gathering up what little courage she had, she tried to keep the fear out of her voice. What? Your introduction please, Pinky. He drawled slowly, blushing and feeling like an idiot for thinking he was going to poke her throat next. She began her introduction. I am Sakura Haruno. Glancing at the still shaking Sasuke, she rearranged her likes. I like boys. I dislike annoying people. She regarded the wide-eyed Konohamaru, who yet to turn his attention from the blonde. And your dreams? Naruto asked, face in his book, not even paying attention to the trio anymore. They had gotten on his last nerves. Sakura bit her lip at that. Her dream right now was a quivering mess. Thinking quickly, she blurted the first thing that came to mind. I want to be a great medical ninja. Naruto nodded, flipping a page in his book before his eye flickered to the last member, then back to his book. Last and least. Konohamaru blinked as if snapping out of a trance before his eyes narrowed at him, regaining his lost confidence from that brief show of power. He rudely pointed at him, raising his voice to volumes that hurt Naruto's ears. What the hell do you mean, least bastard? Konohamaru Sarutobi is not least, Kore. Finding his pattern of speech extremely annoying, Naruto glared at him from over the top of his book. Introduce yourself or get the fuck out of here. The genin recoiled at the tone of his voice before he lost his confident look and gazed at the floor. I'm Konohamaru Sarutobi. I like ramen and chocolate-covered bananas. I dislike onion. My dream is to become Hokage. He spoke fast and finished in a whisper, wrapping his long scarf around his face, seeking warmth from the jounin's cold gaze. None of them were paying attention to him now. They were too afraid to. Snapping his book shut, he ignored how the sound had caused them to jump as he raised himself to his full height. 3 necks craned up to meet his gaze. He was tall. That slouched position really disguised his height. Naruto meanwhile let his eye roam from one face to another. A boy on a suicide revenge quest. A Jinchuriki with so much arrogance that it was palpable. And a girl that was more into boys than her already poor skills. Not to mention the confidence issues. This was honestly the worst team he had ever come across. Why the academy put them together he would never know. Already seeing the disastrous teammate skills and sure as hell problems, he came to his conclusion. You know, I was going to tell you 3 to meet me for survival training tomorrow at 9 for your real genin test. But I decided you're not even worth the time nor the effort. You 3 are going back to the academy, he continued, ignoring their shocked expressions. I don't know what the hell the people running administration were smoking when they put you 3 together. I can already tell you'd be the worst team. With that, he turned on his heel and began to walk away. Konohamaru was the only one that overcame his shock and shouted at him to stop. Wait. What the hell are you saying? What do you mean we're going back to the academy? Naruto shook his head at the genin, his visible eye growing cold. Are you deaf? You 3 fail. He paused at thought that this was the first team he had failed before even testing them. Well, there was a first time for everything. With a shrug he disappeared, leaving behind 3 unbelieving genin. So you failed them? Yep. Naruto was currently seated at a table in the local dango restaurant. His form was slouched and his face stuck in his book, missing the way the person seated in front of him frowned. Tapping her fingers in irritation, Riha reached over and pulled the book down from his face to see his annoyed eye. You know it's rude when you don't pay attention when someone is talking to you. That never got old. His gaze softened before he muttered an apology, slipping his book back into his pouch. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at the table in frustration. Sorry, it's just those stupid kids. They annoyed me to no end. He clicked his tongue, sighing as he turned his gaze towards the window, watching as people walked by. Riha smiled at him, gaining his attention before she held out her hand towards him. His eyebrow raised, but he untangled his arm from its position and allowed his gloved hand to rest into her much smaller one. She slowly removed his plated glove, exposing his palm. She rested the material on the table and intertwined her other hand with his. She soothingly rubbed small circles in his hand, smiling knowingly when she saw his shoulders relax. Naruto closed his eye as he enjoyed the ministrations, silently cursing how she knew how to make him drop his defenses around her. He opened his eye, finding her beautiful baby blues twinkling and mouth giving him a small grin. Don't you think you were being too judgmental on them, Naruto-kun? I mean, they are just kids. Naruto stubbornly ignored the swelling pit in his chest, knowing that he didn't feel any shred of remorse for the teams he failed. But he was losing his inside battle as pink lips formed into a pout and forced himself to look away or fall to the charms of the sexy blonde. The soft hands massaging his palm weren't helping. Stealing his resolve, he stared defiantly at her, issuing a challenging look with his gaze. She smirked before she reached over and tugged his other gloved hand into hers before repeating her previous actions. Having both his palms massaged by soft hands, Naruto felt his resolve crumbling. Smirking at him, she delivered her secret weapon in the form of bringing up his hands to her face and pressing slow kisses on his knuckles. If they weren't out in public, he would be fucking her into the ground right now. From the triumphant look on her face, she would absolutely love it. Naruto mumbled under his breath, causing Riha to lean in closer to his face. What was that, Naruto-kun? He mumbled again, causing her to giggle before she leaned closer till their noses were almost touching. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to talk louder. She purred. You're right. I was being too judgmental. He repeated, sounding as if someone had stolen his book. His man pride had been knocked down a few pegs. It was always him being the seducer in his many relationships, but this girl just made him melt with her gaze. Deciding she had teased him enough, she reached up and grabbed the edges of his mask. She sensually licked her lips. Glancing around and seeing that no one was watching, she was about to give him a nice sweet kiss before knocks on the window outside turned their attention to an Anbu. The masked Black Ops member pointed a thumb towards the direction of the Hokage tower, nodding in Naruto's direction. With the message delivered, he disappeared in a flicker of movement. Naruto cursed under his breath at the bad timing. Seeing Riha's curious glance, he elaborated. Old man wants to see me. She pouted but nodded nonetheless, leaning back in her seat. Naruto stood up from his seat, walking around to her side of the table before he discreetly glanced around and quickly pulled down his mask, placing a quick kiss against her lips. Mask back in place, he smiled down at her. My place tonight? She gave him one of her sexy grins before he winked and disappeared in lightning body flicker. Riha giggled like a schoolgirl thinking about the fun that they would be having tonight and smiled fondly to herself. Naruto was honestly the best thing ever happened to her in all her 23 years of existence. She cupped her cheeks with her hands, smiling as she thought back to the moment when he had taken her up on her offer and called. She had never been more excited. Looking down, she frowned, realizing he hadn't even touched his dango. PFF, him and his damn ramen. She was about to pack up before a throat clear caused her to look up at the fat dango store owner. He held out the bill towards her. A tick mark appeared on her head as she uttered curses, startling the owner. That no good. Naruto had left her with the bill. Again. Naruto appeared outside the Hokage tower, thinking of what would the old man think was so important that he had to drag him away from his lovely fellow blonde. He frowned, thinking of all the times the old bastard had cock-blocked him. Bet he uses that crystal ball of his to spy on me. Walking towards the entrance, the two Chunin guards at the door immediately moved to allow him entrance, saluting at him as he walked past them. Naruto gave them a nod as he entered the building, appearing before the Hokage's secretary, a professional-looking brunette. Her attention was glued to the monitor in front of her as her nimble fingers typed away. The eyes behind her glasses snapped up to him before they went back to the monitor. The Hokage is awaiting for you in the conference room, Namikaze-san. Her monotone voice was respectful but dismissing. She was one of those secretaries. Someone needs to get laid. Naruto chuckled to himself as he turned to his right and began walking up the stairs to the conference room. He smirked, feeling a set of eyes trailing his form, but ignored it as he continued up the stairs, greeting and nodding to fellow jounen and Anbu. Arriving at the guarded door to the conference room, the two Anbu stations saluted at him before they stepped aside, allowing him entrance. Opening the door, Naruto walked into the dark room, coming to a stop before four seated figures. He frowned at the faces. He thought only the Hokage had wanted to speak with him. Why were these three here? Naruto, Namikaze, we have news we wish to discuss with you. Hearing the voice of the village elder Koharu, he cursed silently, knowing that the situation was serious. He should have known from the mention of the conference room that whatever it was, he had either pissed off the higher-ups or was going to be handed a top-secret mission. Judging from the faces, he deduced the higher-ups were unhappy. The conference room wasn't true to its name. Sure, sensitive meetings and talks were held in it, but its true purposes served as top-secret mission assignments from the higher-ups to the select few. Itachi had received his orders to wipe out the Uchiha clan from these four. Naruto had been tasked to assassinate a daimyo at the age of 12 that had almost started a war. It was the super-secret S-class missions with fallout so severe that Konoha had to have no part in. Mission failure was either death or, in Itachi's case, issued missing mine. But in his situation it was lose-lose. He didn't hate the old man for sending Itachi to kill his family, he understood the circumstances. But his respect for him had greatly diminished, plus he let his arrogant godson run around thinking being made into a human sacrifice made him a hero. The bandaged war hawk on the other hand was a different story. He would savor the day when he lodged his sword into his heart. It was Hamura who spoke up this time. You were assigned to the Genin squad, Team 7 consisting of Uchiha Sasuke, Sakura Haruno and Konohamaru Sarutobi, correct? Naruto nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets, already knowing where this was leading to. The official Genin test for all rookie squads is supposed to be held at 9 am tomorrow. Koharu spoke, flipping through papers. Jounen teachers are to reserve judgment only after the Genin have been tested. She leveled him with her squinted eyes. So why, Naruto, do we have young Konohamaru complaining to us that you have failed their Genin team? The Hokage had yet to speak. He sat in his seat quietly smoking his pipe. The hat on his head obscured his eyes. Honored elder, I felt it necessary to fail them because I deemed that their teamwork skills would be wholly unsatisfactory. How were you able to deem their teamwork unsatisfactory only after speaking to them for, as young Konohamaru supplied, 5 minutes? She rudely interrupted. Naruto continued on unaffected. As I was saying, I deemed their teamwork unsatisfactory after watching their interactions and body languages. Sasuke suffers from the feeling that his only goal in his life is to kill Itachi. A road that would lead him to an early death. Sakura is a delusional fangirl unfit for shinobi life. Her body lacks muscle mass for someone her age, most likely due to dieting. I would guess her whole point of becoming a shinobi was to impress Sasuke. Girls like her are best being sent back to the academy. Finally, young Konohamaru is an arrogant child under the delusion that because of his status as Jinchuriki, and being the grandson of the Hokage, that those around him should automatically respect him and essentially, and forgive my language, suck up to him. Which I don't do. Period. With having said his piece, Naruto patiently waited. He itched to pull his book, but right now wasn't a good time to be disrespectful. The two elders quietly mumbled to themselves before Koharu turned to the still quiet third. Hiruzen? The man didn't answer. He just continued smoking his pipe, remaining quiet. They both frowned before turning to the last occupant, who had been just as silent as the Hokage. His face looking like it was carved from stone. Danzu sat quietly in his seat with his one visible eye closed. Seeing that the two didn't seem to be wanting to speak, they deliberated one more time before Koharu cleared her throat, the corners of her eye leveling him with a narrowed gaze. It was no secret that she wasn't the biggest fan of Naruto's, but he would tell it to her face that he hated her guts too. You will reconsider your brief evaluation on the Team 7. Tomorrow at 9 am you will issue the jounen test them. You will pass them, is that clear? Konoha needed its last loyal Uchiha and Jinchuriki. Naruto fixed her with a cool glance. And if I refuse? He watched her face turn from red to purple before the lid on her temper was broken. Listen here, boy. You will do as you're told, and it was the brief spike of chakra that cut off her speech, and her frightened frame glanced to her right to see hard brown eyes glaring at her. She ducked her head in shame and remained quiet in her seat. Hiruzen finally lifted his gaze to the quiet jounen. Removing the pipe from his mouth, he finally spoke for the first time since the jounen arrived. Naruto, I'm afraid I have to agree with Koharu. Team 7 must become Genin. His unreadable eyes met his. You do understand why you were chosen specifically for this team, do you not? So that was their game. Naruto narrowed his eyes in realization. The Uchiha and the Jinchuriki. He was the only one capable of teaching Sasuke about the Sharingan and suppress the chakra of a tailed beast. He remembered the moment he had discovered his powers. It was during his run-in with the Gobi Jinchuriki. 16-year-old Naruto laid panting on the ground. His Anbu armor was melted in some places from the steam-based ninjutsu attacks that battered his form. The Sharingan in his eye glared an angry red up at the large man, whose eyes curled in contempt down at him. Is this all from the son of the fourth Hokage? I must say, I'm disappointed. The steam-based red samurai armor on his form seemed all the more menacing with his chakra shroud. He had been on a solo mission, deep in the enemy territory of Earth Country's mountain ranges. The mission was simple: investigate the last known location of Anbu team that had disappeared at this apparent location. The moment he arrived, his chakra went haywire to the feeling of tailed beast chakra and was greeted to the sight of the Jinchuriki of the Gobi. The battle had been one-sided. His chakra shroud protected him from his attacks, and that furnace on his back emitted steam that would melt him if he got too close. Han's 4 tails of chakra shifted in the wind and he inwardly smiled seeing the hateful look the boy was sending him. The furnace on his back began to heat up and more steam began to pour out of it. He had toyed with the boy enough and was time to end this little game. He imagined the reward he would get, bringing home the melted head of Iwa's most hated enemy. Oh, the riches! Wanting to savor the moment, he slowly walked to the Anbu, leaving melted footsteps in the earth behind him. Yes, he would take his time. Naruto meanwhile was struggling to stand. His chakra levels were low, his body armor melting off his frame and the bleeding wound in his side wasn't helping one bit. His Sharingan took in with detail as the man approached him slowly, no doubt taking his time. His heartbeat was loud in his ear and sweat mixed with blood ran down his forehead. He was going to die here. This man was about to kill him. He could feel the heat from the man coming closer. A deep swelling pit of emotion settled in his stomach. He couldn't die here. Not after everything he had been through. He wouldn't. His chakra spiked and feeling of calm overcame him. The tailed beast chakra that had been bearing down at him since the beginning of the fight seemed to not affect him anymore, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. This power. With a roar he let loose the power that had been building up inside of him, and 4 sets of golden chains seeming to come from his body, shot out of his form and wrapped around the surprise gobi container. The chakra chains wrapped around his form, interlocking with each other, going so far as holding down his chakra tails. Han was left completely bounded by the chains, desperately struggling to break free. Naruto gasped in shock. He could feel the chains as if they were an extension of himself. He felt the way they wrapped around red chakra from the Jinchuriki. He titled his head and was surprised when Han let out a pained gasp as the chains apparently tightened around him, squeezing painfully. He couldn't explain why, but for some reason the word submit ran through his mind, and he watched in fascination as the chains pulsed a brilliant glow before they began to absorb the gobi's chakra. Naruto felt a swell of power inside of him and realized that his chakra levels were returning. Han dropped to his knees as the last of the gobi's chakra left him. He tried in vain to call upon the chakra of the beast, to no avail. He shuddered in pain, hearing the cracks of his body as the chains tightened even more. His armor cracked under the pressure and began to fall off his constricting form. Orange eyes widened despite the pain as they heard the sound of chirping birds fill the air. Naruto was now standing on his feet, his left hand holding his wrist as he focused the Raikiri in his hand. His Sharingan twirled a menacing red as they met his orange eyes. Feeling vindictive, he slowly walked towards the struggling man, the chains all the while keeping the Jinchuriki constricted. Now standing directly in front of him, Han could only stare up at him in awe before he decided he had to pose the question that plagued his mind. How? Naruto shrugged. I honestly don't know. I guess this is the power of an Uzumaki. Han nodded despite the pain and closed his eyes in resignation. The last thing he heard was the sound of the gobi screaming, "Descendant," before a lightning-covered hand pierced his head. Naruto? Naruto? Blinking, Naruto's mind returned to the present, looking at the Hokage's curious face. Sorry. He posed. I said, do you understand? Hiruzen repeated, wondering why the jounen had zoned out. Naruto nodded slowly. Is that all? No. There is something else we wish to discuss with you. It was Danzu who finally spoke, shifting in his seat to sit up straighter. His one eye opened and regarded him with a gaze he couldn't read. What do you know about the organization Akatsuki? This was unexpected. Naruto's mouth formed into a thin line under his mask. I know that it is composed of 10 S-ranked criminals, Itachi being one of them. They're a mercenary group. Itachi had supplied him everything he knew on Akatsuki. The genocide of his clan was just a ruse to gain their attention. His real mission was to infiltrate the organization as a double agent and supply information on their motives back to Konoha. The sacrifices he made. Yes. Danzu spoke. That's what we all were led to believe. He paused before continuing. Their real motives are gathering the tailed beast. Naruto couldn't stop his mouth from opening. The tailed beast. What would a group of 10 criminals want with the tailed beast? Danzu elaborated, seeing his expression. It is unknown what they want with the tailed beast. But we were supplied with some interesting, if uncomfortable, news. The faces of the elders and the Hokage were grim. Orochimaru is a member. The Sharingan in his socket burned at the mention of the name, but he controlled his anger. It was led to believe that he had defected from the group before in the past. But as our informant has supplied, he was accepted back into their ranks for unknown reasons. The room was silent before the voice of the third rang out. What do you think of this news, Naruto? What was he supposed to think? The snake that had killed the man who had molded him into a shinobi was running around with powerful friends. And those same friends wanted the tailed beast. I think that you should have killed him when you had the chance, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen didn't react to the jab, but his eyes narrowed before he let out a pained sigh. He took the hat off his head and ran his hand through his dull hair. His gaze shifted back to Naruto, looking more like he was finally feeling the weight of his old age. I know I have made many mistakes in the past, Naruto. Many mistakes. But you have to understand. Save me the lecture, Hokage-sama. You should have corrected your... The wood of the desk broke under the power of Hiruzen's fist, effectively silencing Naruto. So correct my mistakes, boy. Become Hokage and fix the many imperfections that I have caused. The wood groaned under the force of powerful chakra, reminding Naruto that even though the man was old, he was still the god of shinobi. The third breathed deeply, exhaling out his anger before he regarded Naruto with a sad look. Hiruzen held up his hat to him, his face pleading. Please, Naruto. Your power already outshines us all. Even your father's. I'm an old man in need of successor. Become the Hokage Konoha needs. The third had pestered him countless times in the past to become the Hokage. The Fire Lord had already held him in high favor and the shinobi population had the utmost respect for him. But as many times the Hokage had offered, he had refused. He just couldn't accept it. As Hiruzen gazed at the young man before him, he saw a shinobi that led with the wisdom of a Kage. A true individual that had mastered the way of the shinobi. Genin at 7. Chunin at 10. Anbu captain at 13. Elite jounen at 16. Naruto was the Hokage Konoha needed. The Hokage Konoha deserved. You already know what I'm going to say, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen stared into his face for a moment before he closed his eyes, placing the hat back on his head. Jounen Naruto Namazake, you are dismissed. His voice was unreadable. Naruto bowed stiffly before turning on his heel and walking out the door. He didn't react as his sharp ears caught the whisper the Hokage mumbled before he closed the door. He tried to keep his expression blank as we walked down the stairs, but the frown hidden behind his mask wouldn't budge. Your father would be disappointed. Sasuke walked down the empty streets of the Uchiha compound, thinking back on the previous events that took place. Or more specifically, his mind was still trying to decipher the enigma that was the blonde jounen. He absently traced his neck where the point of his sword had pricked him. He still couldn't get over how fast the jounen had moved. And the feel of his chakra. He had never seen someone with chakra powerful enough to cause such effects to the environment. He shuddered remembering the overbearing weight of it, as it felt as if he would choke to death. He was powerful. The rumors of strength throughout the village were not misplaced. He was entirely worthy of his S-ranked status. At the sight of a light in the Uchiha main house and the smell of fresh cooking filled the air, Sasuke dismissed his mental turmoil. His lips curled upward at the sound of humming and he stepped up to the porch and opened the sliding doors. Stepping into his house, he slid off his sandals and announced his arrival. I'm home. Oh, good evening, sweetheart. A thrill voice rang back. He walked into the kitchen to see a familiar female working around the kitchen. On the table was freshly cooked fish layered with tomatoes and side dishes. A black head of hair swayed as a beautiful face turned to regard him. A giant bowl of rice was held in her hands. Hi, sweetie. Sasuke smiled, feeling the tension in his muscles easing at the sight of beautiful dark eyes. Hi, Mom. He quietly seated himself at the table, smiling up at her as she set the bowl on the table and leaned across it to place a gentle kiss on his forehead. Easing into her seat, she smoothed the ripples on her black dress. She smiled brilliantly at him. She began to fill her plate with food. Muttering a quiet itadakimasu, she dug into her food, chewing softly, before fixing him with another smile. So how was your day? Sasuke had muttered his quiet itadakimasu before he began to eat a slice of tomato. I don't want to talk about it, he said in between bites. Mikoto pouted at him, being so moody. Sasuke-chan, can you at least tell me who your Jonin Sensei is? At the mention of Jounen, Sasuke's mood darkened before he averted his gaze. Frowning, she began to probe. What's wrong, Sasuke? Swallowing thickly, he decided to answer. He failed us. Mikoto frowned even more at this. Wasn't the Jounen issued to test them the next day for survival training? Her mouth opened to ask further questions before a knock was heard at the front door. Sasuke's eyes snapped to the door. They weren't expecting any visitors today. He heard a panicked gasp and cursed. Mikoto had her eyes wide, holding her head, and was shaking in a fear. She stood up abruptly from the table, knocking it over and spilling the food. Her quivering form slid against the sink before she dropped to the floor. "They're coming for me! They're coming for me!" She shrieked as her eyes began to claw at her hair. "They're going to kill me!" Sasuke quickly leaped over the mess to reach his mother, and he fell to his knees to grip her hands that were clawing at her hair. His Sharingan spun to life, taking in her crazed eyes and badly twitching form. She had not been taking her medication. His hands guided her face to his as he focused chakra into his eyes, ignoring her audible mumbles. "Relax, mother. You're safe." Her wide eyes lost their crazy glint and her mumbles became whispers. Her eyes lowered in a trance, and he held her until her shaking stopped. Seeing that she was safely lobotomized and couldn't hurt herself, he palmed a kunai and slowly made his way to the door. He deactivated his Sharingan as he reached to slide it open. Cracking it open, he saw the curious gaze of a lone blue eye staring at him. "What do you want?" he sneered. Naruto ignored his tone as he took in Sasuke's guarded look and tense form. His sharp ears had heard shrieks and the scent of fresh food was strong. Mikoto, he mused. He didn't understand why Itachi had spared her. He had thought the only one he was going to leave alive was Sasuke. But it seemed that Itachi just couldn't bring himself to kill his mother. He personally knew the woman from a young age as his mother, and she had been friends. Other than knowing her, there was little interaction between them. "I'm just here to tell you that you are to meet me at Training Ground 7 at 9 sharp. Sasuke was surprised, but he nodded nonetheless. "I have already told the other two the same thing." Naruto scratched his cheek, looking uncomfortable. "I want to say I'm sorry for what happened on the rooftop. I mean, if you want to go ahead and if you want to kill Itachi, it's whatever floats your boat." He smiled at the boy just standing there. Sasuke waited before he frowned at him. "You can go now." Naruto scratched the back of his, looking even more uncomfortable. How's Mikoto doing?" Sasuke's eyes narrowed at him and the Sharingan spun to life in his eyes. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the sight. "When did he unlock his Sharingan? How do you know my mother?" Sasuke knew that this man could kill him in a flash, but he would rather die than let one of these bastards come for his mom. "Our mothers, used to be BFFs." He titled his head at him. "Met her a couple of times in the past. Sweet lady. And a hot one." Sasuke's eyes widened in realization. "You were that blonde Anbu that always used to come with Shisui for Itachi." He remembered his brother leaving every day with the two for missions. Itachi had said that they formed the best Anbu squad that Konoha ever had. He had never known his identity, as the blonde had never spoken or interacted with him. "She's fine," he added stiffly, no doubt not wanting to tell the jounen that his mom suffered from a mental disorder. A phobia from the books he had read. She couldn't even leave the house from her severe fear. Sasuke had taken the responsibility of shopping for food and clothes at the same time keeping up his ninja training. Seeing his mom in her condition every day only added fuel to his fire of revenge. He will avenge his clan. "All right." Naruto nodded at him before he held his hands up into a peace sign and disappeared as if he hadn't been standing on his porch at all. Sliding the door shut, Sasuke cut the chakra from his eyes and sighed as he walked back into the kitchen. Eyeing the mess distastefully, he walked over to his mother, seeing her still under the genjutsu. With a grunt, he helped her to stand and began to direct her out of the kitchen, into the hallway and up the stairs to her room. Slipping her gently into bed, he let his Sharingan spin into her eye that forced her into a genjutsu-induced sleep. Gently covering her with blankets, he let his eyes wander over her. Her sleeping face was angelic, no longer the frightened mess that haunted him in his sleep. His hands formed into fist before the sounds of his knuckles cracking filled the quiet room. Itachi would pay. He quietly listened to her soft snores before he walked out the room, gently closing her door behind him. Checking the time, he saw that it was well after 10. Arriving into the kitchen, he soundlessly cleaned up the mess and dumped the wasted food into the garbage. He had lost his appetite anyways. Exiting the back of his house, he walked to the private training grounds and continued on to the forest behind the house. Entering into a clearing, his Sharingan stared hatefully at 8 individual targets lined up into the trees surrounding him. He had accompanied Itachi in his younger years to this place, witnessing his impossible skill of hitting each target, and even the one lined up behind the rock as blind spot. Palming kunai and pushing chakra to his legs, he leaped into the air, twirling gracefully as he let the kunai fly from his fingers. His movements mimicked his brother's as he threw them, making them clash together to change trajectory and hit the targets. Landing soundless, he surveyed his work. He sneered at seeing he only hit 5 of the 8 targets. Walking around the rock, he saw that he had completely missed the blind spot. He slammed his hand against the rock in frustration, the crushing feeling of failure swelling in his chest. He still wasn't good enough. His eyes stung with unshed tears as he began to retrieve his kunai. Itachi was always ahead of him. Always. Even at his age, he had been an Anbu captain long since mastering the Sharingan at the age of 8. The measuring ladder never seemed longer between them. Your movements are too stiff. Sasuke instantly threw his kunai to the sound of the voice and saw the blonde jounen seated on a branch high in a tree reading his book. The kunai he threw had been plucked out the air, twirling in between his fingers. He hadn't even looked up from his book. Finally leveling Sasuke with a curious eye, he repeated. Your movements are too stiff. Too tense. You need to relax as you throw. Sasuke didn't let up his glare. Why are you here? Have you been spying on me? Naruto placed his book into his pouch before he soundlessly dropped before the paranoid Genin, inwardly smiling when he saw him tense. I was in the neighborhood. He supplied in a rather unconvincing manner. Sasuke just stared. Naruto shrugged before he glanced around at the targets, smiling under his mask at the fond memories he remembered here. His gaze found the annoyed Uchihas before he poked the boy in the center of his forehead. You need to relax when you throw. Tension will hamper your movements. Sasuke glared up at him as he rubbed his forehead, sneering at him. And I suppose you're an expert at this? Naruto smiled. Why, yes I am. Who do you think showed Itachi how to hit multiple moments at the same time? That wasn't true. It had been the other way around, but Sasuke didn't need to know that. His eyes lost their harsh look before he gazed curiously up at him. You taught Itachi how to do this? Yep. Looking like he was having an internal battle, Sasuke grimaced, his cheeks turning red, and he averted his gaze. Holding up to kunai in his hands, he looked extremely uncomfortable. Can you show me, please? Naruto reached up and exposed his Sharingan to the surprised Genin. Sure. Chapter 4, Team 7. Lemon. Someone needs to work on their stamina. He drawled as he eased the covers over them and wrapped his arms around her, enjoying the feeling of her cool skin against his. He gave a soft kiss to her neck and contentedly rubbed his cheek against hers. Riha's response came out as a tired mumble. Sorry. A grin was on his face from the feeling of her lips whispering against his skin. Sorry, I'm not, stamina-freak. Her voice trailed off as her quiet snores filled the silent room and her slow heartbeat began to drum against his chest. His silent laughter made her face bounce up and down against his chest, but it did nothing to disturb her unresponsive form. Yep. She was out like a light bulb. Peeking a glance at the clock hanging on his wall reading 9:15, Naruto remembered that he had assigned the Genin to meet him at Training Ground 7 at 9 sharp. He was already 15 minutes late. Glancing from the clock to the sleeping beauty on his chest, then back to the clock, and finally to the softly snoring blonde, Naruto reluctantly decided he should show some professionalism and started to slowly ease Riha off of him. Best to not waste any more time. Only to have her sleeping form wrap her arms around his head and push him face first into her soft chest. It would be another 2 hours before Naruto decided to get up. Konohamaru grit his teeth in frustration as he marched back and forth around the training field as he felt his already short temper at its limits from the ridiculous lateness of the team sensei. It was well past noon. The source of his current anger was the pink-haired member of the team who was currently sitting close to Sasuke, averting her eyes from his narrowed gaze. Konohamaru huffed before he continued his pace around the training field. With his back finally turned to her, Sakura lifted her gaze to rest on his aggravated form. She had been the first to arrive at the training ground exactly at 8:30, hoping to make a strong impression of being the first to arrive. The second to arrive was Konohamaru, who came 15 minutes after her and had immediately ran up to her and bid a loud greeting, much to her ire. Still trying to be polite, she bid him a good morning in return, which the boy took immediately as a sign to pester her for a date that resulted in him being smacked in response. He dejectedly got the message and seated himself on the ground, drawing patterns in the dirt. The final member of the team came exactly at 9, strolling into the training ground with his hands in his pockets. He silently greeted the other members with a head nod, ignoring the shout of his name by Sakura, and had seated himself on the ground like Konohamaru, but crossed his legs, closed his eyes, and promptly kept silent. Sakura had immediately seated herself beside Sasuke and began to pester him for dates, and when he didn't respond, she tried to just talk to him. When he still didn't respond, she gave up and just sat there quietly, utterly mesmerized by his cool attitude. The trio sat in quiet silence with one member grumbling, the other fawning, and the other meditating as the time went by. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. 1 hour. 2. Okay, where the hell is this guy? It was the voice of Konohamaru who broke the silence. Not one for patience, he felt his hackles rise. His day started when he regrettably woke up extra early this morning, as he was not a morning person. He did his daily hygiene ritual, of showering and brushing his teeth. Ate breakfast and scampered here, hoping to show seriousness in being early, as the last meeting between him and the lazy jounen had not gone so well. He was utterly surprised when the jounen had showed up at the Sarutobi compound last night asking for him. When they had met, he had first apologized, which shocked him, for failing them, and told him to meet at training ground 7 at 9 sharp. But this kind of tardiness was downright ridiculous. He was a whole 2 hours late. Did this guy not know what it meant to be on time? I mean, who the hell tells someone to meet someplace at 9, and then show up at noon? Sakura had to agree with the loud Sarutobi, as she was feeling the effects of coming here early. She had to blink back sleep and routinely keep staring at the still silent Sasuke to occupy her thoughts. I bet this bastard forgot about us, he shouted. Sakura winced at his loud voice, and she growled at him, brandishing her fist threateningly. Konohamaru, shut it. You're too loud, you idiot. The boy in return grinned sheepishly at her, scratching his nose in that nervous gesture of his. Sorry Sakura-chan. But you have to agree this is ridiculous, he finished nervously. The pink-haired kunoichi rolled her eyes before she nodded in agreement. Yeah, what was the point of telling us to come early if he wasn't even going to show up on time? She turned to the meditating Sasuke. Right, Sasuke-kun? Both members were surprised when Uchiha finally spoke since arriving. You shouldn't be surprised. He was 3 hours late yesterday. He didn't even open his eyes. Sakura pouted at him before her eyes brightened, and she tried her luck again. Say, Sasuke-kun, after the test you want to get something to. No. Sakura dropped her head in frustration. Why does he always reject me? I know I'm not ugly, so why is it he never notices me? Konohamaru tried to muffle his humor by holding his hand over his mouth, but the sound of his laughter rang out in the training field. It was hilarious to see her still try after so many years of the same answer. Some people just couldn't take rejection. It was in his final year of the academy that he began to have a slight crush for Sakura. He had tried once in a while to ask her out, but it would seem that she was dead set on having tall, dark and brooding. He never saw the fist coming that put his face into the dirt. Sputtering and coughing out dirt, he pulled his face out of the ground before he glared up at her. What the hell was that for? Sakura dusted her hands off before she glared down at him. That's for laughing, you jerk. Konohamaru was affronted. So? Why the hell did you have to hit me for? Sakura sputtered in response, not wanting to lose an argument to Konohamaru, especially in front of Sasuke, before she racked her brain for the best answer. Because it's rude to laugh at a woman trying to win love. She promptly turned her nose up at him and crossed her arms. He stared dumbly at her for a few seconds. What? So that gives you an excuse to hit me? She stood on her feet, hands on her hips, as she glared down at him. You were being an idiot. Maybe it was frustration of their late sensei, or the annoyance of Sasuke not even sparing her glance, but feeling the need to vent her frustration, she targeted the young Sarutobi. I'm tired of your arrogant attitude and letting all that hero worship go to your head. All throughout the academy you were nothing but loud and rude because of your heritage. I don't know why the whole village treats you as one, but being the grandson of the Hokage doesn't make you a hero. Even the normal blank Sasuke stared at her wide-eyed. Sure, Konohamaru was arrogant and loud most of the time, but didn't she know why the village idolized him? Konohamaru held his mouth open in disbelief as the girl started, but slowly began to lower his head as she went on. Why can't you be like Sasuke-kun? Shut up. His whispered words fell on deaf ears as she continued. You don't see him acting like you. Shut up, Sakura. Why can't you be modest like him and... Shut the fuck up. The sound of his voice echoed throughout the silent training ground. Birds nesting in the trees took to the sky in fright. Konohamaru held his head down not to expose his face as he felt a familiar burning sensation start to rise from his core. His hands formed into fists so tight that the now clawed fingernails cut into his skin. Sakura stood silent, mouth in shock. Did Konohamaru just yell at her? Finally realizing the gravity of her words, she tried to usher an apology. Listen, Konohamaru, I didn't mean, her words in her throat as she realized the angry Genin wasn't sitting. He had moved. But her eyes didn't even realize it. It took her mind a few seconds to process that he was standing directly in front of her. His breathing was ragged and his body was trembling all over as he fought the urge to wrap his clawed hands around her throat. His head was still bowed and his form still tense. Sasuke quickly stood from his seated position quickly and moved to the duo in case the angry Jinchuriki made a move to harm Sakura. His Sharingan analyzed the young Genin as he began to speak. "Don't speak to me, like you know me, Sakura." With that he moved away from the frozen Genin and marched himself into the forest at the other side of the training field. Waiting till he was deep into the forest he went to a nearby tree and punched it, snarling all the while. Snap! The towering oak split in half and with a groan tumbled to the forest floor. Konohamaru stood there watching the tree as he closed his red glowing eyes and tried to calm his erratic breathing. Inhale. Exhale. He let out a calming breath as he finally felt the burning chakra in him recede. Feeling the strain of such an eternal battle he dropped his back against the stump that remained of the great oak and mumbled under his breath. There was nothing but the sound of his own breathing before he felt the feeling of being watched. He sighed in frustration, no doubt expecting them to come running to investigate. Of course he would send them. He tiredly rubbed his temples as he waited for them to make their presence known. When no one appeared he growled in annoyance. "You can come out now. I know you're there." As soon as the words left his mouth he found himself surrounded by a trio of white masks. He growled as they stood in silence, their features indistinguishable as they just stared at him, his face reflected in all three of their white masks. It was just a misunderstanding. A slip of control. Nothing to worry about. There was silence before the one in the middle spoke, the sound of his voice masked by the voice-altering software issued in all of their masks. Konohamaru couldn't hide the way the sound caused his hairs to raise. Recommendation: in control of emotion would be advised, young Sarutobi. The sound was sinister. "We will be watching." With the warning delivered, the masked individuals disappeared right before his eyes. Gritting his teeth in frustration he ignored the feeling of dread that welled up in him. He punched the ground in frustration. Control. That was he needed. He knocked his hat in frustration of having lost control of his temper yet again. That was the second warning from them already. The first had been during his academy years when he almost spoke his secret in anger from being picked on by some older kids. He wasn't really liked because of his arrogant attitude, but he couldn't outright tell them that this was just a persona ordered for him to take up. Sometimes he cursed being what he was. The message was clear: control yourself or suffer the consequences. He already had 2 warnings. There wouldn't be a third. Sasuke glanced to the female member of the team to see her tentatively sit beside him. From the corner of his eye he saw her gaze at him, then down at her hands before she nervously bit her lip. Sasuke, I just want to say Tita. That mouth of yours will get you in trouble." Her green eyes widened at the remark. His face wasn't looking at her but staring at the forest that the container had run into. What? I don't understand dash. Sasuke cut off again. Why would you say that? He pointed to the forest in question before his coal eyes bore into hers. When you know what he is? He finished. Sakura was confused. What? I know he's the Hokage-sama's grandson. Everyone knows his heritage, I'm talking about what he contains. When he saw her confused eyes he looked at her in disbelief. Thinking her to be joking he came out and said it. Don't you know that he's a Jinchuriki? A Jin, what? Sasuke was utterly at loss for words. Everyone in the village knew he was the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, so why was it that the supposed smartest girl in the class didn't have a clue what he was saying? Don't you know about the Kyuubi attack? Why Konohamaru is called a hero? Do you know anything? I know about attack Sasuke-kun, but what does that have to do with Konohamaru? Isn't he a hero because he's the Hokage's grandson? Sasuke honestly face-palmed before he gave her a dull look. His eyes narrowed at her generally confused face. She honestly didn't know. Cole's eyes momentarily widened before he quickly questioned her. Does any of our age group know what happened to the Kyuubi? Sakura gave him a strange look before she nervously bit her lip, gazing down at her conjoined hands. Not to be rude, Sasuke, but everyone knows that the Kyuubi was destroyed by the 4th Hokage. Sasuke stared dumbly at her for a few seconds, wondering just what the fuck was going on before realization came to him. Konohamaru's status was known to the adult population of the village, but none of the younger generation knew that Konohamaru was a Jinchuriki. What the hell? Now he remembered the strangeness of hearing history lessons of how the 4th defeated the Kyuubi by sacrificing his life and killing it. He had immediately known that was genuine BS but never questioned why. He had figured it out for himself one day by making connections and having theories. Posing his question one day, he asked what Konohamaru was to his family, and it was all but confirmed when he saw them stay silent. After then he thought it was common knowledge that everyone knew, never questioning why the village idolized him. But racking his brain in thought, he realized that everyone was always careful with their words. If there was one thing that Sasuke learned from Itachi that he took to heart, was how to read people. The way they talked, looked, the clothes they wore, every characteristic about them. On his walks around the village he always heard people just call him hero. And nothing else. They would praise. Tell him he was brave and the same old, but their smiles would never reach their eyes. The sincerity in their voices would be forced. Sometimes they would glance around in search of, what? Being watched? Being monitored? It didn't make any sense. Even Konohamaru, for someone with such a big mouth, never mentioned anything of his status to anyone. Realization hit him. It was kept a secret to the younger generation. The older generation, the adults who knew, were not to mention anything of his real status. Under what penalty though? Usually most secrets in the village were kept under the penalty of death. So were the civilians being threatened into idolizing him, but one whisper of the Kyuubi would have them executed? It doesn't make any sense. Saying his thoughts out loud finally caused Sakura to utter her confusion. What doesn't make any sense, Sasuke-kun? And what's a jinriki, or whatever you had just said? And what does that have to do with Kono? Shut up. Sakura promptly closed her mouth as Sasuke made his face impassive and resumed his meditation. For now he pushed his thoughts on Konohamaru to the back of his mind. He would try to solve this mystery at a later time. Sakura dejectedly kept her questions to herself before her gaze found the eyes of Konohamaru coming out of the forest. His eyes met hers and she quickly averted her gaze. She heard him scoff before he continued his pacing across the training ground, his heavy footsteps vibrating the ground. The only sound for a while was that of his feet stomping around the training field. And that was how Naruto found them when he appeared in a flicker of movement. Good morning, idiot Genins. All eyes snapped to the sound of the voice, finding the sensei of Team 7 standing in front of them with his hands in his pockets, giving them that weird eye smile of his. Morning. It's fucking noon, you idiot. Konohamaru's voice was just shy from a growl as he sneered at the still smiling Naruto. And why the hell are you 3 hours late? Naruto tilted his head back, staring up at the clouds as he absently scratched his chin. It's noon already. Time sure does fly. His blue eye opened to regard the genin in question with a dull look. I would call you an idiot, but that would be an insult to idiots everywhere. He ignored the way the genin bared his teeth. As for me being late, well, I was going to leave home early, but you see, I have this little kitty cat at home and boy was she hungry. She wouldn't let me leave if I didn't feed her. So I had to satisfy her with my bottle. The three genin just stared, but she wasn't satisfied with the one feeding I gave her. So I had to feed her again and again. His voice trailed off as a perverted giggle came from his masked mouth. An uncomfortable silence filled the training ground as Team 7 stared at their sensei in wonder. Sakura was confused as hell, not understanding his words. Was he trying to make a joke? Konohamaru slapped his hand to his face, finding a pervert bigger than the old man, and the last member was blushing up a storm, having understood the innuendo in his words. He knew for certain this man certainly did not own a cat. Naruto found it hilarious at the same time, the reactions of the two boys, but from the reaction of the only female member of the team it would seem that she was a little slow. Give or take a few years before she understood his naughty jokes. Dismissing his thoughts, it was time for business. Right. Here I have with me a timer. He pulled out a small brown clock and walked towards the 3 stumps in the training ground, placing the timer on the stump to the right. He turned back to the genin and held up 2 bells to their vision for them to see. Your job is to get these bells from me any way you can before the timer runs out. I strongly advise you to come at me with the intent to kill. Before we start, any questions? Sakura shyly raised her hand. Sensei, what kind of a test is this? And why are there only 2 bells? This, my dear pink-headed friend, is what I call the bell test. I can't tell you what kind of test it is, but I can tell you the rules in a moment. As for the bells, well, that's a secret. He finished with an eye smile. When no one looked like they wanted to ask any more questions, he nodded. He saw Sasuke finally stand to his feet and smirked as he saw him allow his Sharingan to activate. Turning to Konohamaru, he raised an eyebrow at his intents. He shifted his eye to Sakura, who looked nervously at him, then to her hands before she steeled her resolve and stared up at him defiantly. Good, at least she had some determination. He closed his eye inwardly laughing before he made a seal. Everyone tensed as he brought his hands together and in a flash of smoke a perfect replica of himself appeared. Shadow clone. They couldn't keep their mouths from opening as the original hopped onto the stump in the middle making himself comfortable and pulled out an orange book. As I said before, you have to get those bells. If one of you manages to get the bells, you would be able to give a bell to one teammate, meaning both of you would pass and the other fails. If you manage to destroy the shadow clone, well, the person who destroys it passes, while the others immediately fail. He grinned at their shocked expressions. If you fail to get the bells or destroy the shadow clone before time runs out, you all fail. He handed the bells to the clone as he waited for his information to sink in. The clone nodded at the original as it beckoned the Genin, getting them to follow him. They walked for a while before they stood in the training ground clearing. 100 meters in each direction from standing directly in the center. On the edge of the clearing was forest all around. The minds of the Genin were racing at the rules of the test as they moved into position to the shadow clone and watched with tense breaths for any moves. All the while their brains recounted the rules. Get the bells from him and two of them would be able to pass, the other would fail. If one of them managed to destroy the shadow clone, then only one of them would pass and the others would automatically fail. Manage to not get the bells or destroy the shadow clone, then they would all fail. For bonus, they had to do this within a certain time limit. You have 1 hour. The voice of Naruto's clone announced to them. On the other side of the training ground, the real Naruto started the clock. You may begin. Fire style, Great Fireball Jutsu. Fire style, Burning Ash Jutsu. Sasuke and Konohamaru immediately blitzed through hand seals, releasing their respective attacks at the same time, causing the giant fireball to ignite the burning ash cloud into a giant explosion that rocked the training field. The shockwave of the explosion was so powerful that the two Genin were thrown across the training field. Sakura, in her haste to make it to cover, was also thrown back by the force of the explosion and landed in some bushes. The real Naruto remained in his seated position on the stump, pulled his face out of his book as he saw in the distance a large black cloud of smoke rise in the air. He whistled in appreciation before he shoved his face back into his book. When the smoke of the explosion finally began to clear, a 10-meter crater was all that remained of the spot the shadow clone inhibited. The earth was blackened and charred around the crater from the intense heat of the attack. Oh shit, that hurt. Konohamaru groaned as he pushed himself face first out of the dirt. A wheeze of pain escaped his mouth as he stood shakily to his feet. Beside him he heard a groan and saw Sasuke do the same. He bit back a laugh at seeing the entire front side of Sasuke covered in dirt and mud sticking to his hair. Eyeing his form, he saw that his condition was no different, other than that they were both relatively unharmed, until a fist hit Konohamaru on the top of his head. Why the hell was everyone hitting him today? Idiot, didn't you see I was attacking first? A headbutt was his answer. Didn't you see I was trying to provide cover, moron? They both stood bumping heads, glaring at each other before a shrill whistle came from directly behind them. My, can't say that I'm not impressed by such an accidental collaboration attack. The arguing boys turned to see the shadow clone standing behind them, hands in his pockets, unharmed. Not even a speck of dirt on his form. Then he moved. The feeling of awe was replaced by pain as two fists planted in their stomachs launched them across the field. They impacted the ground harshly, stumbling before they came to a stop. Both boys wheezed, coughing and holding their stomachs, feeling like they were hit by a train. Oh shit, that hurt. This time Sasuke had to agree. Despite the pain, he pushed himself to his feet, seeing the jounen still in the same position as before. At least he was giving them a chance to recover. He quickly turned behind him to see Konohamaru standing on his feet. There was no way a group of Genin could take on a S-ranked jounen. They needed to work together. He glanced back at the jounen, making sure he hadn't moved before he returned his eyes. Teammate, Konohamaru, we need. He stopped dead as the jounen was standing behind a confused Konohamaru. His speed was unreal. Seeing where his eyes were looking, Konohamaru palmed a kunai and spun on his heel, swiping at the jounen, but found his arm held in an iron grip. Naruto increased his grip, causing the boy to wince and dropped the kunai into his awaiting free hand. He twirled it in his finger as his lone eye turned to Sasuke. The Uchiha narrowed his eyes at the silent message. What will you do, Sasuke? Retreat would be what a normal ninja would do. But he was an Uchiha. Leaving a teammate behind would make him unworthy of wearing the fan on his back. His eyes met Konohamaru's and two nodded. Blitzing through hand seals he inhaled as he built up chakra to the chakra points in his throat and endured the burn as he held it. Konohamaru ruthlessly pulled himself from the jounin's grip, causing a sickening pop from his arm as he hit the dirt. The jounin was utterly shocked at what the genin had just done before they narrowed at him. He threw the kunai that he held in his hand to force Sasuke to stop his jutsu and hopped backwards for cover. Despite the burn of his throat, he inwardly grinned. Forcing every ounce of chakra control he had, he utilized Kawarimi with the aerial kunai and appeared in between the two. It was truly satisfying to see the eye of the lazy jounin widen in alarm. The Tomos in the young Uchiha's eyes slowed down time as he watched the flames spew out of his mouth. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Naruto swung his body upside down midair, unsheathing his short sword, with his body pointed downwards. He could feel the heat of the flames as he stabbed his sword downwards. The only thing Sasuke could do was widen his eyes as the blade rapidly extended, hitting the dirt, propelling Naruto upwards out of the path of the flames. Sasuke's mouth dropped open as he stopped his jutsu. Landing on his feet, ignoring the burning of his chakra points, he grabbed the downed Konohamaru and the duo disappeared in a shunshin. Up in the canopy of the trees, Naruto let out the breath he had been holding. That was way too close. Showing great dexterity, he was perfectly balanced, vertically holding the handle of his sword, his feet sticking up in the air as he wiped his face with his free hand. Lowering himself on a nearby tree branch and still holding the blade's handle, he cut off the flow of chakra he had sent through the sword. The blade slowly began to retract before it held its short sword length. Naruto flipped the sword, holding it upwards, staring at the Kusanagi blade with affection. I fucking love this sword. Meanwhile, on the other side of the training ground, high up on a large branch, both boys let out pained breaths. One from popping his arm out of its socket, the other from the intense burn of his chakra points. Konohamaru pushed himself up on his good arm and grasped his dangling left. With a snarl and crack, he pushed the arm back into its socket, biting back the scream wanting to leave his throat. Sasuke coughed roughly, spitting out smoke, holding his throat in pain. The feeling of his throat being on fire was unbearable. Thankfully the gambled worked and he had freed his teammate, but he was hoping to have caught the shadow clone with that move. He knew from their first meeting that the blade could extend, but who would have thought that the jounin would use it to propel himself like that? Ingenious. Konohamaru rolled his arms a few times, hearing satisfying cracks, before he rummaged through his utility pouch, finding a small bottle of water. He moved closer to Sasuke, offering the bottle that was taken from him in a flash. Sasuke downed the bottle like a person dehydrated and felt the cool liquid ease away the burning in his throat. Ushering his thanks to his teammate with a nod, he punched a hole into the tree they were residing in and stuffed the bottle inside. Littering in a training ground was rewarded with a steep fine. That guy is a beast. How are we supposed to get the bells? Sasuke nodded in frustration. He knew without a doubt there was no way the both of them would get the bells by themselves. Destroying the clone? He would have a better chance of asking Itachi to kill himself. They needed the whole team. They needed Sakura. At least she would be good enough to provide a distraction. But right now he had to analyze of what he knew of the jounin. He was strong. One punch sent the both of them flying. He was extremely fast. Even to his Sharingan his reaction speed was unreal. And he was smart, no doubt, having carefully crafted this test. How many teams has he tested? How many of them had passed? Remembering his words on the academy roof, he guessed many had failed trying. Konohamaru mirrored his thoughts. It's designed to split us apart. He continued, ignoring how Sasuke widened his eyes at him. As he mentioned, if one of us destroyed the clone, that person would be able to pass, the other two would automatically fail. Predictably, you and I were aiming to destroy the clone. He crossed his arms, closing his eyes. If we wouldn't be able to destroy the clone, he would expect us to go after the bells next. He opened his eyes to see Sasuke openly gaping at him. What? Sasuke stared for a few more moments before he shook his head with smirk on his face. So then, seeing that we weren't able to destroy the clone, we did immediately as he expected. Sasuke frowned in thought. But the first time he attacked was only after we attacked him. We didn't even get a second chance before. His voice trailed off as both he and Konohamaru came to the same conclusion. Only after we tried to work together. They both finished in sync. Konohamaru smashed his fist into his open palm. He would wait for us to make a move before he acted. But when he saw you to turn to me, he tried to stop us. Even then he tested you to see if you would abandon me or try to save me. Sasuke nodded with Konohamaru. So it was a test to see if Genin could work together under pressure or dismiss a major principle in Konoha's teachings and try to be selfish. Sasuke was utterly impressed with the mind of the blonde jounen. His previous thoughts of meeting Sakura were correct. To pass this test they need to work as a team. But right now there was one major problem. The eyes of the two Genin met and a silent question passed between them. Where was Sakura? A shrill scream echoing in the forest was their answer. At the start of the test Sakura had made a dead sprint for the forest. She was thoroughly surprised when she heard two jutsu come from the boys that she slowed down and turned to look at. If she had continued at her pace she could have avoided the impact of the explosion that knocked her into some nearby bushes. Dazed and disoriented, her vision focused to see the smoke of the explosion clearing to reveal a giant crater in training field. From her position, she was under some bushes providing her perfect cover and wide enough to allow her to witness the battle. She let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding when she saw both boys were unharmed but covered in dirt. She had to bite back, shouting out their names as she saw the jounen appear behind them in a flash of movement, looking untouched by the explosion. Both of them were currently arguing and had no idea the jounen was watching them. She saw Duo finally turn to him before in another flash of movement he just appeared in front of them, and then two Genin went flying. She hadn't even seen him move. And then he just stood there watching them get up at a distance away. From their distance she could barely make out Sasuke standing to his feet, glancing from the jounen to Konohamaru. She witnessed that terrifying speed of his again when he suddenly appeared behind Konohamaru. She saw the surprised boy swing at him with a kunai, but the attack was easily intercepted. He then continued his hold on him and turned to Sasuke. She had expected Sasuke to retreat and leave Konohamaru. That's what she would have done. But she ignored the voice in her head saying that if it was Sasuke she would have acted. She couldn't tell because his back was towards her and she was squinting to try and see in the distance, but it looked like Sasuke was about to perform a jutsu before Konohamaru tore himself from his grip. A black object flew from the jounen's hand towards Sasuke and he jumped backwards. Sasuke disappeared in a burst of smoke and reappeared directly in front of the jounen. A fireball spewed out of his mouth and she couldn't hold back her squeal of joy. Sasuke-kun is the best. Shaw! The fire blocked her view of the jounen, but she saw Sasuke grab Konohamaru and disappear. She frowned at that. Didn't Sasuke get him? Feeling curious she decided to move to a closer location before a familiar mop of golden hair walked out of the forest. She ducked back into cover, hoping she wasn't spotted, watching him with bated breath. She saw he was untouched by the fire and was twirling in his hand that weird sword of his. He twirled it graciously for a few moments before he smoothly sheathed it. He looked off to the side, glancing in the direction the two boys went before he nodded. He then turned and began walking directly towards her. Sakura cursed and went prone on the forest floor, moving backwards as quickly as she could, all the while keeping her attention him. He was a good 80 meters away, giving more than enough time for her to run. Rip! Glancing at her sleeve she cursed, seeing it had ripped from catching on a nearby thorn. She cursed as she realized she took her eyes off of him and glanced back in his direction, only to scream as he was stooping down watching her with his traditional eye smile. Hello, Pinky. Dismissing stealth, Sakura charged out of her cover, not caring that her clothes got ripped by thorns or leaves got tangled in her hair as she ran deep into the forest from the blonde. She chanced a glance behind her to see him not following, and seeing enough movies to know that if the bad guy wasn't following, she faced forward and green eyes widened as Naruto stood in front of her. From her momentum she couldn't stop herself. Thump! Her wide forehead impacted off Naruto's jounen vest. Running full sprint and hitting hard, abs protected by 2 inches of thick Kevlar face first knocked her flat on her back. Her world went black for a few moments and she nearly drifted into unconsciousness, saved only by her forehead protector taking the brunt force. World spinning and disoriented, Sakura frantically grabbed her head, groaning in pain. Ouch! That looked like it hurt. Her world came into focus, seeing the jounen towering over her, hands in his pockets, eye watching her with disinterest. Sakura, still a little disoriented, used her hands to bring herself up to sitting position. Her eyes widened as the jounen copied her and plopped himself on the ground beside her. Sakura, let me ask you a question. Seeing her shaky nod, he propped an elbow on his raised knee. And I want you to answer honestly. He watched her take off her headband, rubbing a nasty purple bruise on her forehead. Why did you want to become a shinobi? His other hand palmed his face, held up by his elbow, looking relaxed as if he was watching a harmless insect. Don't forget the test is still on. He added quickly. Sakura thought about her answer. Why did she want to become a shinobi? She would always tell herself the main reason she first wanted to enroll in the ninja academy was when she first laid eyes on Sasuke. But thinking back on her younger years, it was Ino had told her to join the academy with her. She had been teased and bullied over her forehead, and because of that she was highly insecure and timid during her younger days. Ino had been a childhood friend that had stood up for her to the many bullies that picked on her. She was everything she was not: smart, beautiful, and highly popular. When she had told her she was attending the academy, Sakura was quick to follow. She blinked back the memory, seeing the jounen still hadn't moved, watching her quietly. She pressed her fingers together before she mumbled her answer. Well, I wanted to become a ninja, because I was picked on a lot. My friend Ino was joining the academy, and I wanted to be just like her, so I followed her and joined as well." An eyebrow rose. "So you chose this dangerous profession because of your insecurities?" When she nodded timidly as he sighed, closing his eye. He was silent for a few moments before his lone eye opened, taking on a hard glint. "Sakura. I'm going to say this only once. This profession is not a game. Insecurities or worries of how you look, or even boys, don't matter. I understand your low self-esteem from being picked on, but I can tell you right now, that girls like you don't make it past their first C-ranked mission." He held up his fingers, listing reasons one by one. "Be it either mental, physical, or psychological reasons, or maybe even death, shinobi life will break girls like you one way or another." With having said his piece, he stood up, dusting off his pants. He saw the girl looking wide-eyed at him, tears forming in her eyes. Never one to be heartless, he reached down and gently patted her head. "I'm not trying to scare you, Sakura. And don't for a second ever think I'm telling you to quit. I'm just trying to warn you of the danger." He reached under her chin, tilting her head to look up at him. "I hate to see a girl like you that shows such promise wasted all on boys and looks. The least you can do is show me the reason why you were ranked the #1 kunoichi." With that he backed up and beckoned her with 2 fingers. "Now let's see what you've got." Sakura wiped her unshed tears on her sleeves before her face morphed into determination, and she jumped to her feet, firing off kunai at him. She wasn't surprised as he dodged all of them, going so far as to pluck one out of the air and return it back to her. It hit Sakura right in her forehead, making Naruto narrow his eyes before she disappeared in flash of smoke, a piece of wood in her place. He turned to his right to see her beside a tree, grinning victoriously as she swiped a kunai on a piece of wire. Naruto had to hit the dirt, nearly avoiding the kunai that would have lodged into his back. He didn't have time to wonder when she set a trap before he heard a whistle and glanced up, only to quickly roll to avoid shuriken that dropped from the treetops. Using his momentum, he rolled to his feet, staring wide-eyed at the girl who pouted as her traps failed to work. Still not giving up, Sakura charged at him with a kunai in hand, engaging in textbook perfect taijutsu taught at the academy. Naruto danced around her, watching her teeth grind in frustration as she desperately tried to swipe at him. He backpedaled from her, gaining more distance before his eyes narrowed as she smirked again and threw a kunai behind him. With the sound of tripwire, a hail of kunai came from behind him. At the same time, Sakura threw more kunai at him from his front, hoping to trap him. Cursing as he was instructed not to perform any jutsu, he had to make use of his taijutsu and kenjutsu and drew his sword in quick motion, forming it to a long sword as he spun, slashing at the kunai. Sakura's mouth dropped open at the sheer skill he showcased, spinning rapidly as the sounds of metal on metal rang out and kunai fell all around him. Coming to stop, his breathing was hard and visible sweat was on his face. Sakura inwardly pitched herself, remembering that this was just a shadow clone. There had to be a limit to the amount of chakra provided in the clone, and it looked Sasuke and Konohamaru had managed to wear him down. Making one last-ditch effort, she threw smoke bombs on the ground. Naruto had zero visibility and had to rely on his keen sense of hearing. He couldn't use his nose from the smoke. Smart, Sakura. Robbing your opponent of visibility and smell was always a plus. When he heard a rustle, he stuck fast with a jab, resulting in the sound of Sakura's scream echoing through forest. When the smoke cleared, Sakura was on the ground holding her chest, looking at him in horror. Naruto's face immediately paled and his lone eye went wide. From the shape of his mask, it looked like his mouth had dropped wide open as he gawked at the sight. "Sensei, how could you?" Her voice was broken. Naruto dropped to his knees, looking at the accused hand as if it was diseased. He stuttered in response, words failing to come out of his mouth. Sakura grinned victoriously. Hearing a roar of female fury, he turned to see Sakura, a red mark on her face from his previous blow, charging at him, her fist cocked back ready to strike. Shinaro! Thwack! The force of the blow caused Naruto to comically spin his vision, seeing stars. Before he disappeared, he saw Sakura fade into nothing. Oh shit, she got me. The real Naruto was still seated on the stump reading his book when the memories of his clone returned to him. His book dropped from his hand and his eye went wide before he groaned and slapped a hand to his face. He shook his head in shame. No good piece of shit, shadow clone. An S-ranked ninja foiled by an E-ranked clone jutsu and barely developing breast. He glanced at the timer reaching to stop it and cried comical tears as he saw that there was only 1 minute left. It was the moment that she destroyed the clone that Sasuke and Konohamaru appeared looking ready for engagement. They stared at Sakura, who had her mouth open in shock and glanced around for the powerful jounen. Seeing he wasn't around, the young Sarutobi popped the question. Sakura. He scratched his head. Have you seen Sensei? Sakura could only nod dumbly, her mouth and eyes still wide open in shock. Sasuke glanced around the area with his Sharingan, seeing kunai and shuriken littered around the place. There were clear signs of a battle, but where was blonde shinobi? Konohamaru walked up to the unresponsive Sakura and waved a hand in her face. When she still didn't move, he walked around her and looked into her wide eyes. Following her line of sight and seeing nothing but forest, he stared confusedly at her. You okay, Sakura? As he mentioned the words, realization returned to Sakura and she jumped, hugging Konohamaru, shouting at the top of her lungs. I did it! I can't believe it worked! Sakura wrapped her arms around Konohamaru, grabbing his face as she stared into his frightened eyes. She shook him back and forth, frantically screaming, all the while repeating her previous words. Konohamaru shook like a rag doll from her impressive strength before pink lips pressed against his cheeks and he was dropped like a sack of potatoes. Seeing crazed green eyes turn to him, Sasuke tried to run but was tackled from behind from the seemingly mad Kunoichi as she repeated her previous actions. In that moment, the real Naruto appeared at the scene, seeing a badly twitching Konohamaru on the ground and Sakura, shaking Sasuke back and forth like a leaf, screaming at her victory. The Uchiha's mouth was wide open and his eyes unfocused from being violently shaken. Catching blonde in her vision, her green eyes found Naruto and he had to take a nervous step back from the look in her eye. Now Sakura, there's no need to act. He was tackled by the girl and hugged as she started crying tears of joy, thankfully not shaking him as she did with the boys. He awkwardly patted her on the back in return. Finally, having vented her joy, she sat up staring at Naruto, wiping her eyes. You can get up now, Sakura. Realizing her position, she blushed and leapt off him, sputtering her apologies. Naruto stood to his feet, rubbing his chest, and looked over to male members of the team, having finally recovered from her intense shaking. Both were blushing up a storm, having pink lipstick on their cheeks. When Naruto's raised eye glanced at her, she ducked her head in embarrassment, her face mimicking her hair. Naruto shook his head before he cleared his throat, gaining their attention. Well, children, it would seem that we have our winner to the test. He gestured to Sakura. Congratulations. The only sound in the forest was Naruto's slow clapping. Konohamaru and Sasuke stared dumbly at Sakura before they looked at Jounin, then back again, and repeated the action. They then turned to each other, blinking, before they frowned and glanced around. Were they in a genjutsu? Naruto rolled his single eye at their behavior and patted Sakura on her back, gaining their attention once more. Pinky here destroyed my shadow clone all by herself. Something the two of you failed to do. Knowing the rules of the test, Sakura passes, you two fail. Both boys were both shocked and angered at same time. First, because Sakura of all people managed to take down the shadow clone, and second because that was something they both failed to do. The two top students of the academy both failed. Sasuke was thinking of the disappointment of coming home to tell his mother of his failure. She would be devastated. Konohamaru was a different story. He paled considerably, thinking of those goons reporting to him. They were always watching. Both boys were saved from their thoughts when Naruto walked over to where his clone was destroyed and picked up the bells that had clattered to the ground after it dispelled. He tossed them to Sakura, who caught them staring at him in confusion. Tell you what, Sakura, you can give the bells to one of your teammates. The person you give the bell to will pass, the other one will be sent back to the academy. Your choice. All eyes were now on Sakura as she stood there staring at Naruto in horror. She glanced at the bells before she looked at two boys, searching their faces. Both of them were blank, giving nothing away. She glanced at the bells one more time before she nodded in resolution. Walking towards the surprised Genin, she grabbed both of their hands and placed both of the bells in their open palms. She stared into the eye of the jounen. If anyone should be sent back to the academy, it should be me. She reached up and put her hands on their shoulders. Both Konohamaru and Sasuke are way better than I am. If anyone deserves to become Genin, it should be them. Naruto searched her face, seeing nothing but grim resolution in her eyes before he nodded in resignation. Well, when you put it like that, I guess I'm just going to have to pass all of you. It was a comical sight to see their mouths drop open at the same time. He waited a few moments for it to sink in and was rewarded to see Sakura wrap her arms around both boys, pushing their faces together, cheering at the top of her lungs. A genuine smile formed under Naruto's mask and he stared fondly at the scene. He waited for them to finish celebrating as both boys bumped knuckles and a happy Sakura kissed both boys on the cheek again, making them blush. He cleared his throat, gaining their attention once more. Now, pushing celebrations aside, there's still one more lesson to learn here. Walking towards them, he placed his hands on each the boys' shoulders and told them to hold on to Sakura. Waiting for her to adjust, they disappeared in a shunshin. Sensei and students appeared in Training Ground 3. The same training ground that the third Hokage taught the Sannin and where the third himself was taught by the second Hokage in his Genin days. It was said that this training ground was created by the god of shinobi himself, Hashirama Senju, and the trees surrounding it still growing since the founding of the Leaf Village. It was made into a large clearing, with forest all around. The sound of a running river could be heard inside the forest. At the far end of the training field sat 3 similar stumps, and behind them, the memorial stone. Beckoning the trio to follow him, he stood silently in front of the stone, staring at the many names forever carved into it. Despite the thousands, his eyes always automatically found the specific names that he was looking for. Minato Namikaze, Kushina Uzumaki, Kakashi Hatake. He closed his eyes as he felt them stand silently behind. After a few moments of silence, he spoke. The memorial stone. The names of Kia are forever carved into it. He reached out and placed his hand on. I come here every day to pay my respects. The genin stared in stony silence as he turned to face them, searching their faces. The names of my parents, my sensei, and some dear friends are on this stone. He stared up at the sky, watching the clouds. By the time I was your age, I was in Anbu. I was on a mission with my sensei, who was my team captain at the time. Long story short, the mission went to hell and I took an explosion to the face, losing my eye. As you may know, Hatake Kakashi, the copy ninja, had the Sharingan. He gazed at their faces before his hand rose and lifted his headband. He died on that mission, but before he died he gave me a gift. It was my birthday and he didn't have a present. No more words needed to be said as the team gazed into the red orb that mirrored so many emotions. Sakura was wiping back her tears, and both Sasuke and Konohamaru watched on in stony silence. You're shinobi of Konoha now. You'll take missions ranging from a variety of classes consisting of either D, C, B, A, and if you're lucky, S. You'll murder, you'll steal, rape, bribe, intimidate, seduce, torture, and do many more, all in the name of Konoha. And the end of the day you walk to the mission assignment desk and accept a check. His voice was blank. When you find the need to improve your skills, you'll reserve one of the many training grounds provided by Konoha. At the end of the day you go home and try to sleep, only for the face of your victims to haunt you. If you manage to gain a few hours of rest, you'll wake up and cycle starts all over again. Their faces were grim in understanding. I've learned a lot as my time as a shinobi. Some lessons are learned the hard way and some you learn for yourself. He sighed deeply, fighting down the building emotions before he regarded them. Your teammates now. A bond formed between fellow comrades. If there is one thing that will stay with me for the rest of my life is this. Those who break the rules are trash. Those who break the rules are trash. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. I'll never abandon my comrades, Kakashi. That's a promise, believe it. He smiled fondly at the memory, his gaze lowered in thought. I'll hold you to it, Naruto. Maybe you'll teach this to your own kids one day. You. Kids? Why would I want a bunch of brats? Hey, don't ignore me, Kakashi. He chuckled to himself, wiping his misty eye on his sleeve and gazed at the now puffy-eyed genin. It was Sakura who broke first as a stream of tears ran down her face. She was consoled quietly by both boys, with Konohamaru wrapping an arm around her and Sasuke awkwardly patting her back. Naruto waited till her tears stopped before he pulled out a small envelope stamped with each of their names. These are all the rewards that come with being a shinobi. Bank accounts, library access, store information, and more. He walked near the group handing each of them a letter with their respective names before he smiled fondly patting each of their heads. You're the first group I've ever passed, so congratulations are in order. Go and celebrate. With that he waved them away in a shooing motion. Let's celebrate at Ichiraka Ramen. Konohamaru shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Sasuke had a small smile on his face and nodded in agreement, following the happy Genin. Sakura was about to follow before she paused and stared back at the unmoving Naruto. Won't you be coming, sensei? Naruto laughed, shaking his head. I'm afraid I have to decline. I have to make a report, but you three should go on by yourselves and get a chance to know your teammates. The girl nodded before she ran to catch up to the waiting boys. Naruto watched them go for a while before smiling to himself before disappeared in Shunshin. Walking beside the two boys, Sakura stopped mid-step, gaining their attention. She bit her lip, nervously glancing down at her feet before she locked gazes with Konohamaru. Listen, Konohamaru. About what I said earlier I want. She was interrupted by Konohamaru's laughter as he waved off her apology. It's alright, Sakura-chan. No hard feelings. His eyebrows wiggled suggestively. But if you're really sorry, how about another kiss? He tapped his cheek. Sakura rolled her eyes before she reluctantly agreed, pressing a quick peck to his awaiting cheek. She couldn't help but laugh as he blushed brightly with a wide grin on his face. A flash of black caught her attention and she saw Sasuke walking ahead with his hands in his pockets. Sakura rolled her eyes again before she skipped up to Sasuke and pecked his cheek. She giggled at his reaction as he slowed his steps and waited for Konohamaru to join them, who glared at Sasuke as the Uchiha smirked at him in return. Boys. Rolling her eyes again, she followed them, not knowing she would be the soon-to-be victim of raging male hormones. All Jonin Sensei of the Academy's graduates were in the conference room of the Hokage Tower awaiting the Hokage. Among the Jounin were small portion of the military police and clan heads in the back. This year was ripe with potential for the hopeful batch of Genin. Of course, all the children of the major shinobi clans of Konoha were Genin this year, so there was a lot of high expectation. The chatter that filled the room immediately quieted to silence as the doors opened and the Hokage walked into room followed by his advisors. The group of shinobi parted in his way as the entourage moved to the table at the end of the hall, and the Hokage eased himself into a chair flanked on both sides by his advisors. With a snap of his finger, an Anbu appeared with an envelope holding the names of all teams and their respective Jonin Sensei. Pulling the paper out of the envelope and setting it before him, Homura presented a pen in his awaiting hand. From his robes he pulled out his familiar pipe and plopped into his mouth. His eyes turned to Koharu, who grumbled before she pulled out a match and dipped into his pipe, lighting it. The assembled group of shinobi dared not show their humor or face severe consequences. Now happily puffing on his pipe, he began the roll call, pen ready to either check or cross out teams off the list. Team 1. Fail. Team 2. Fail. Team 3. Fail. Team 4. Fail. Team 5. Fail. Team 6. Fail. Team 7. The Hokage glanced up from the sheet looking for the Jounin of Team 7. Seeing not a blonde amongst the colors, he frowned. He glanced to the Jounin in front of him, posing the question on everyone's mind. Where is Naruto? A fairly tall and light-skinned woman of slender build rolled her eyes before answering. Knowing him, he probably saw a black cat and took the long way here. Her long black hair bounced from side to side as she shook her head, closing her eccentric red eyes. Fiddling with her bandage battle dress, she crossed her arms under bountiful breast, turning to a familiar Jounin beside her. Your boyfriend needs to learn punctuality. Riha ducked her head in embarrassment, grasping her Jounin vest as all eyes fell on her. Of course Naruto would choose now off all times to be late. She would make sure he received good punishment when he came home. A rough hand landed on her shoulder and she glanced up at the wide smiling face of a familiar green spandex wearing Jounin. Pay no heeds to her words, youthful Riha-chan. I'm sure my eternal rival is late for a reason. Everyone winced at the volume of Mato guy. Riha smiled nervously at the eccentric Jounin, who grinned down at her, giving a thumbs up. PFF, yeah right. My guess would be he had to help an old lady cross the street. It wasn't hard to miss the sarcasm in his voice as Asuma Sarutobi itched for a smoke. He rubbed his beard and idly scratched the back of his short black hair. Because of his tall height, he had a clear view of the Hokage as he smirked at him. Don't forget he gets lost on the road of life. A voice shouted from the back. Or he forgot his sandals at home. Another spoke. How about the one where someone stole his book? The orange one or the red one? The entire group of shinobi shared a laugh that even brought a smile to face of the Hokage. but clearing his throat he instantly quieted the chatter. Let's leave the laughter for another time. There are still teams to list. Moving on. Everyone's eyes swept to door as it creaked open and a familiar head of blonde hair stepped inside. Hand in his pockets, looking like he just woke up, Naruto stared at the group. "Ma, sorry I'm late. I got lost on the road of life, lost your wallet, saw a black cat, walked under a ladder." Naruto blinked at the questions before his single eye narrowed at the crowd. "Have you people been stalking me?" This time even the Hokage had to join the group and laugh at the remark of the jounen. Naruto I smiled at them, people parting as he made his way to front, all the while shaking hands and ushering greetings from fellow ninja. Finally reaching the front he bumped knuckles with Asuma, accepted a bear hug from Guy and a wave of the hand from Kurenai. Turning to a familiar blonde he saw her scowl at him before her lips twitched in a smile. Winking at her he turned his attention to the front. "Yo!" The Hokage smirked at him before he shook his head at the jounen. He turned his attention back to the sheet and continued. Team 7. Everyone straightened up at this. Did Naruto pass the Jinchuriki and Uchiha? Naruto could feel the tension and teasingly paused for emphasis before he spoke in slow whisper. Fail. The only sound in the room was Hokage's pipe hitting the desk. Everyone else stared wide at him in shock. Naruto could feel all eyes on him and the glare from the Hokage and his advisors as he scratched his chin in thought. Oh well, best end the fun before the old man shits his diaper. Stuffing his hands into his pockets and trademark eye smile on his face he was quick to backtrack. Just kidding, those kitties passed. That's it for part 2. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.